Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if you're new, and today, I feel like I have too much headroom. Is that too much headroom? Yeah, I like that better. Okay. You may have noticed that yes, I am indeed in a robe. That is because today is going to be another long video. I'm going to be reviewing The Haunting of Bly Manor that just came out on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. I really want to try my tea, but I think it needs to cool off. Okay. So there will be a spoiler-free section. I'll put a timestamp link down below for when all the spoiler-filled stuff starts if you want to skip ahead. But first, I want to talk about kind of the culture surrounding the show before I get into any of my thoughts on the actual show itself. So first of all, I very much get the sense that they are kind of trying to copy American Horror Story. Not in terms of stylistically in the way that they shoot it or the general tone and vibes of the show, but there were some plot points in Bly Manor that made me think, am I watching Murder House right now? And they use a totally non-linear story structure. Now it makes sense for the plot in this show, but I just couldn't help but feeling like I was watching one of Ryan Murphy's shows. And they're doing the whole anthology style where every season is a different story. Only technically, this is the first season of The Haunting of Bly Manor. It's like technically a different show, but there is a haunting collection on Netflix. And I have a theory on why they did this. On Netflix, it's ridiculously easy to like get a show to be greenlit. We know this, there are so many garbage shows that only have like 1 or 2 seasons on Netflix. And apparently with the viewership on Netflix, if your views drop at all in the second season, you do not get greenlit for a 3rd season. So I think them making them technically separate shows is kind of their way, their like loophole around that. Another topic before I get into my review is the marketing for this show. Before it came out, they were like, the critics are all rating this at 100%. This show is so good. It's rated at 100%. It was so hyped up. And like, granted that marketing technique worked. It made me really excited to watch the show, but for the payoff and for the actual show itself, it's far from deserving a 100%. It's not a bad show, it just doesn't live up to the hype of the marketing, and I just think that's kind of an unwise marketing strategy because you had people so hyped up, and like that does work. It's good in the sense of marketing and getting views, but the show has to live up to it if you're gonna do that, you know? Because then once the show comes out, the word of mouth marketing is not gonna be nearly as positive as all the marketing prior when the critics were like, we rated it at 100%. Because now what people are saying, what I'm about to tell you, is that it's not what you expected it to be. And that brings me to how it was marketed in the trailers. They made it seem like it was going to be a super paranormal, super haunting based show. And then it was a pretty mild drama with just a few like horror elements just sprinkled in. There were a couple jump scares that worked for me throughout the entire show. Only 2 of them actually come to mind. I can't remember the rest. And in comparison to Hill House, it's like, why though? I need to rewatch Hill House though because it did come out 2 years ago. Maybe it's not as scary as I remember, but I remember it being pretty genuinely terrifying and pretty full of horror. So anyways, if you still haven't seen this show, just try to manage your expectations a little bit, especially if you loved Hill House. This one does not quite live up to the 1st season. It's also a great deal slower paced than Hill House, and that's not inherently a problem. And I do like a slow burn, and you can get away with that, especially with TV, but it was like really slow, you guys. There were 9 episodes, and I think that 2 of them could have been just entirely deleted. And the rest of the episodes probably could have been cut down, and it probably could have been like a 5-episode show. Because I just felt like it was dragging until I literally reached the 8th episode. The 8th and 9th episodes were pretty good, but it's kind of too little too late because I just spent 7 episodes, almost 7 hours on this storyline before it finally kind of started to pick up and things started to like click and fall into place. I almost didn't finish it. I almost gave up after episode 5. My cousin told me she stopped watching after episode 4. It's just very slow. I'm also just gonna briefly touch on this because I'm gonna do a whole character breakdown during my spoiler section, but a lot of the characters were also really flat. You follow Dani, right? And she and maybe a couple of the other characters are the only ones that are given really an interesting backstory. Also, a lot of the characters, it doesn't feel like a lot of the characters get what they deserved. I didn't really feel much of a sense of closure after watching this show because I was kind of upset with the way that things played out. Now, all of this being said, it's not a bad season by any means. Like, it's just very mediocre, in my opinion. I can't say this with confidence though. I think you should definitely try it out for yourself to see how you feel about it. And also, I do recommend checking out my friend Jennifer Vega. She has a channel where she does movie reviews, and she reviewed The Haunting of Bly Manor as well, and she really liked it. She has a lot of really positive things to say about that, and I really appreciate her perspective. I definitely, like, we disagree on some things, but it's kind of more just about like preference. So I highly recommend checking her channel out, especially if you want to see a more positive review. But on that note, I do have some positive things to say about the show, so I will get into that now. I like that we had a very feminine-centered show, but it was a feminine-centered show that wasn't solely for the purpose of highlighting women's issues and gay issues. That's what Ratched was, and like, Ratched was great. It's important to highlight those issues, obviously, so like, you know, other groups can empathize and whatnot, and so we can feel like we have representation and our struggles and whatnot could be validated. But this was a story where, with the exception of like one episode, no one was really struggling with their sexuality. No one outside of this gay relationship was like questioning them. It was never made into a weird thing. It was, for lack of better terminology, a normal romantic storyline. That's not to say it was boring. Like, there still were some struggles, some issues with the relationship and some drama and them coming together and whatnot, but none of those issues were centered around, ooh, I don't know if I like women, or like, ooh, my parents, they'll disown me if they find out that I like girls. We got a smidge of those issues in one episode, like very briefly, but for the most part, there was basically no gay struggle. It was very refreshing because when I saw those characters, I was able to relate to them, and I was like, ooh, it me, without being reminded that being me can be kind of a struggle sometimes. Now, like I said, it wasn't a seamless relationship. There was still some complexity in how they got together, but none of the complexities involved gay. Speaking of the ladies, there was an excellent and fairly diverse main cast. Tanaya Miller, hello. How are you? I feel like she's another hidden gem that I was not expecting. This happened in Ratched as well. They cast some unknown actors, and they definitely did that in this season of Manor. Outside of the Hill House stars, there were some other relatively unknown actors. Alex Esso stars in this show, and she plays Wendy in Dr. Sleep. Iconic. She's also in a very underrated movie called Starry Eyes. Now, this is a great movie, but it's one that I personally can't rewatch because there are just some really disturbing elements that aren't for me. I actually talked about that movie in a list of high-rated horror movies I hate. I actually don't hate most of those movies. That was kind of just, you know, clickbait. And one last actor highlight in my spoiler-free section, Oliver Jackson Cohen. This man, he also starred in Invisible Man earlier this year. That accent, I mean, so we had a good gay time and we had a really great cast. I'm gonna give you my overall thoughts before I get into my spoiler section. So overall, this is not a horror show. It's also very much an ensemble piece. There's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of subplots, there's just a lot going on. And I think it's kind of to its detriment because I never felt like quite enough of a connection with any of the characters. It was just like too little amount of time with each of them, you know what I mean? Aside from maybe Danny and Jamie. I'm honestly not really gonna recommend it. Of course, I always recommend trying things out to see it for yourself and not just taking the word of somebody else. But if you have similar preferences to me, I know that time is important to people. Not everyone can afford to sit down and watch a 9-hour show if they don't like it. That's just not gonna be worth it to some people. I can't say with full confidence this is worth 9 hours of your life because I don't really see myself rewatching this season. Hill House, that's a totally different story, but with this one, I don't know, it was kind of lackluster to me. It didn't really leave me feeling complete. Didn't leave me feeling a sense of closure. So I would personally recommend passing on it, but like I said, definitely check out Jennifer's video. She has some positive things to say and that might persuade you to watch it. I don't know. So I will now be moving on to my spoiler section. Yes. So let's start with our characters. That's how I did it in my Ratched video, and we're just gonna break down all the characters and then we will break down the plot of the show. I'm gonna start with the surrounding cast and then work towards our main people. So I'm gonna start with the Uncle Henry Wingrave, who was played by Henry Thomas. He played a character that has the same first name. By the way, I'm drinking a peach oolong today. So Uncle Henry, a confused, sad piece of shit. I'm not even gonna talk about the mother, honestly. She's the one played by Alex Esso. She was in the show just such a small amount. I'm not gonna talk about her character. She was obviously the one at fault for this as well. But come on, Henry, really, dude? You're gonna sleep with your brother's wife. Like, this man, though, I just feel like there was so much more to be desired with him. He was the only person who was being haunted by Bly Manor while not even being there and while also still being alive, which is just a huge plot hole, by the way. Don't even get me started. Also, there is a leaf blower outside and that's infuriating. So I don't know if that's why he was so absent in his niece and nephew's lives or if it was because of the affair, but like, you're the only surviving family that could take care of them. So he was very unlikable. This did allow allow him to go through some character development though, but really in the end with him caring for his niece and nephew, he just ends up kind of doing the bare minimum, what he should have been doing all along. He also was the only person with an alter ego, which I guess was kind of connected to the way that Bly Manor was haunting him. That was very confusing to me. Never had any closure with that. That kind of popped up in the earlier seasons and then where to go? What happened to his alter ego? Like, I'm confused. Moving on, Katie Siegel. I remember her being such a strong player in The Haunting of Hill House, and then in this show we only get her in one episode? That's interesting. There was just several things wrong with that I won't fully get into. She was kind of a typical misunderstood villain with like a sympathetic origin story. You can sympathize with her. And I think she owned the role pretty well. We just didn't get to see enough of her. Now let's move on to Miss Jessel, who was played by Tahira Sharif, a horribly underused character. They had an opportunity to make her a character that struggled with her morality. They could have created some drama within her subplot, but she was just so passive and so much happened to her. Just feels like a missed opportunity because she saved Flora with so much ease. There was no questioning her morality in that moment. I guess I just would have liked to see a little bit more action with her character and her not being so passive. On that topic, I guess let's talk about Peter. Peter could have been so much more interesting too. And what's tragic is I think he just was not fully fleshed out. And I don't know if I just wasn't paying well enough attention, but also I just was really curious about his motivations. They didn't seem that clear. When he was dead, it was about getting off the property, yes, but then he kills Rachel. What is the purpose? Why was he the way that he was? When he was alive with Miss Jessel, I understand their motivation in wanting to move to America to try to become something different, make something of themselves. But then the way that he treated her, and then in death, his actions, the man made no sense. I just don't feel like we got enough time with him and Miss Jessel to understand them. Because we had one scene where he blew up on Miss Jessel for eating some cake batter from Owen. Where did that energy come from? Why did it never come back? Like, you're gonna create an interesting and dramatic moment only for it to fizzle out and we never come back to it? Honestly, like, the nerve of these writers. And to be honest, I feel like the characters of Miss Jessel and Peter could have been entirely omitted from the show. I truly do not see what they contributed to the plot that couldn't have been taken out. Because the way that I see it, it's just with them, because we don't really get enough of them, we don't get enough of their little subplots fleshed out, they feel more so like a distraction because as I mentioned, this is very much an ensemble show. I didn't need that. I think we could have just focused more on Danny and Jamie. I do get the need for a secondary villain, I get that, and that's what Peter was, but I think that slot could have honestly been filled by like Uncle Henry or something. For God's sake, the man had an evil alter ego. Why wasn't that explored more? Honestly, just my opinion, just get rid of Peter, get rid of Miss Jessel, have Uncle Henry be the secondary villain. Anyways, and also with Peter, I'm like, okay, this was a show about the women. This was about them. He was the only man in the show that I felt like was just simply taking up too much space. And that would have been fine if he ended up having more of a purpose, but as is, it's just, this was a show about the women and he was taking up too much room. I was like, go. Because both Jessel and Peter just ended up raising more questions for me than they answered, so I didn't need them. Next. Speaking of men, actually, let's go to Owen. A character that I actually liked, yes. A man that took up just the right amount of space. A man that adored a wonderful woman. A man who took care of his aging mother. A man who cooked, who was a chef. A man who offered cake batter and an occasional goofy pun. Like I said, just a man that took up just the right amount of space. He also never stopped loving Hannah. He eventually dedicated his restaurant to her. Just such a lovely character overall, the one that I didn't know I needed. It's rare for me to like male characters that much, I'll be honest, and I loved him. I adored him. On that note though, let's move on to Hannah. Tanaya Miller. Okay. Such a talent, such an underrated actress. I'm so glad she was cast in this. However, she deserved infinitely more than she received. But that brings me back to one of my points about this show copying American Horror Story, because there was a moment in this show that just screamed Murder House to me. Just a little heads up, there are gonna be some Murder House spoilers, so if you've never watched American Horror Story Season 1, I'll put a timestamp down below so you can skip ahead past the American Horror Story spoilers. Did Hannah not go through the exact same process as Violet from Murder House? They both realized they were dead via an epiphany that kind of was nudged along to them by a secondary character. Violet's body was down in a basement, Hannah's body was down in a well. The way that they proved that they were dead to themselves is they went and they looked at their bodies. I was just like, I've seen this before. And also, what also reminded me of American Horror Story is that the souls get stuck on one property. It just very much felt like a British version of Murder House. But anyways, Hannah deserved more. I found her character to be just a little bit flat because we did not get the same amount of background information on her that we did for our other leading ladies. Her husband left her. That's about all we get in terms of dramatic backstory. And the only character development she went through is that she had to go through the process of realizing she was dead and also going through the process of realizing and confessing her feelings to Owen. And of course, this character development, her realizing she was dead, this led to her helping the people that were still living. Or did it though? Did she, what did she do to help them? I don't know. And okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the children. I'll begin with Miles, played by Benjamin Evan Ainsworth. He is a talented kid. His character was obviously annoying and kind of just created hell for everybody, but he seemed to develop fairly well by the end. He wasn't acting out anymore or causing havoc. I think it's because Flora's near-death experience kind of humbled him a little bit, so he went through some good growth. Of course, we don't always expect a ton of growth from child characters, but it was good that he had some. Going back to the talent, when he was being possessed by Peter, I really bought into the fact that there was an adult trapped in his tiny prepubescent body. I was like, dang. He even adopted the mannerisms. He very much carried himself like an adult. His performance was phenomenal. Now, Flora, she was played by Amelia Bea Smith, who is also apparently the new voice of Peppa Pig. I don't want to talk shit on children, but she was so annoying. Honestly, I could not stand her. I couldn't understand her motivations, and they kind of became more clear as the show went on, sort of. But the fact that she aided Miles in locking Danny in the closet, and all the secrecy with her that ended up tormenting Danny, and all the, it will be perfectly splendid. Why was that her thing? You really don't need to give most characters a thing like that, especially if they're children, because children usually tend to be very strong characters anyways. I just found the whole, it's perfectly splendid, I found it to be way too repetitive. I think if they had only done it a couple of times, that would have worked well. But as is, it was kind of just overdone. I was like, if she says this one more time. Anyways, I feel bad about that just because she is talented. It is, especially when you're that young, to have that kind of a performance. She did a good job. It's just, I don't think her talent really matched the level of Miles, of Benjamin. So anyways, moving on to the leading ladies. Amelia Eve played the lovely Jamie. She's pretty talented, but also there was nothing really much about her character that was super defining. We got a couple minutes of her giving a monologue of her life story and whatnot. That was beautiful. That was a really nice moment with the moonflower and everything, and her expressing why she loves plants and whatnot. It was interesting to me that her background didn't really seem to affect her emotionally that much. She was very much a grounding, she was Danny's rock, you know what I mean? She was the perfect temperament to be with someone who had really bad anxiety or PTSD like Danny. Okay, not me romanticizing anxiety, but it reminded me of my own relationship with my boyfriend, because I get anxiety attacks sometimes, and my boyfriend is literally just the most calm person I have ever met. Nothing ever rocks him, and so whenever I get worked up and I'm starting to have an anxiety attack, he just holds me and he just takes deep breaths so I can try to get my breathing even, so I can get my breathing back under control. And their relationship just reminded me so much of my own. I was like, cute. And then of course we find out that Jamie is the narrator. She's been narrating the whole time. Kind of a plot twist. I definitely thought that it was Danny narrating. I have conflicting feelings about that. I'll talk about that when I get into the plot. So let's move on finally to Miss Danny Clayton, played by Victoria Pedretti. I love her, such a talent. However, in The Haunting of Hill House and in Bly Manor, I felt that she was kind of typecast into very similar roles, and she tended to kind of be the weaker link. She tended to kind of be a weaker character. She was given 2 roles in which she had PTSD. That was a little bit more unclear in The Haunting of Hill House. Both characters had to deal with things that they never deserved to deal with, and I don't know, it just kind of feels like a missed opportunity to me because she can play a very strong character. If you've seen her playing Love in You, an amazing performance by her in You. If you have not watched that show, it's a bit much, it's a bit problematic, but it's really, really good. I don't know, I guess I wish she wasn't so soft-spoken because she has the ability to play very, very strong characters, and I wish they kind of would have taken advantage of that a little bit more. But this is more of a tragic romance, more of a tragedy drama kind of a show, so I get it. And her development, it just kind of sucked. Like, it was a tragedy and she didn't deserve it. So anyways, on that note, let's move on to the plot. Let's break it down. I'm not going to talk about every single episode like I did for Ratched, just because I think that the first couple episodes definitely sort of blend together and some of them are not important at all. So we open on this wedding reception and we find out that our story is going to be told via this narrator. I'm not the biggest fan of narrators. I feel like it's kind of a cheat because then you have this person that's like an omniscient viewer and kind of just knows everything. So then they end up sort of spoon feeding you information instead of making interesting scenes and like showing you what happens, they tell you. So it was an interesting choice. I don't always hate having a narrator, it's just not my favorite. The narrator, she was also played by Carla Gugino? She was in The Haunting of Hill House. I think she has a lovely voice, so like it wasn't necessarily to this show's detriment or anything. I didn't really mind it. But the only other noteworthy moment in the first episode is when Danny gets locked in the closet. That was the first jump scare that I remember. The one with her ex-fiance popping up in the mirror, that one actually genuinely scared me. But of course that scene also pissed me off because I was like, oh great, these kids are going to get on my last damn nerve. Now episode 2 can literally just be deleted. Nothing important happened in episode 2. The only important thing is Danny and Jamie had their meet cute moment because Danny was having a panic attack and Jamie kind of helped to calm her down. That was literally it. I think the entire rest of the episode could have been deleted. I think that moment even could have just been pushed to a different episode. Episode 3 was a little more interesting, so I am going to read the summary of this one. So this is the one where we figure out that Peter Quint, who works with Henry, like meets Rebecca Jessel when she interviews for the au pair position. They like flirt and start a relationship and stuff. This is the one where Peter becomes really possessive of Rebecca and like really jealous of her like eating the batter from Owen. And then they think that Peter is on the grounds of the house. They assume he's like alive and stalking them or something because they think that he doesn't know that Rebecca's dead or whatever, but in reality he is a ghost and he's just stuck on the property. Some other random unnecessary stuff happens, and then as Jamie's leaving, Danny has a panic attack again and she screams when she sees the specter with the glowing eyes appear before her. This episode is an issue for a number of reasons. Oop. We don't need that subplot with Peter and Rebecca. I'm sorry, we just don't. Like I mentioned, there's that whole moment with him getting jealous that just has no payoff. He comes back and then they're fine. Second, Danny keeps having these interactions with this Spectre guy and I found that to be highly fascinating. I was like, ooh, I cannot wait to see how this kind of plays out and when the eventual payoff is gonna be. I bet it's gonna be good. And then it turns out we find out literally in the next episode that it's like her dead fiance, and I guess she has like PTSD or he's haunting her. I'm not really sure which. And it should be PTSD because otherwise it doesn't really make sense, because why is she being haunted before she even gets to Bly Manor, you know what I mean? So I was excited about that and I found that to be interesting. But here's the thing, we have souls that are stuck on the property of Bly Manor. We have a man with an evil alter ego, and we have Danny who is haunted by her ex-fiance or has PTSD or whatever. It's too much. It's like, this is double mumbo jumbo territory. This is just, it's too much. I just think that things could have been simplified like a little bit. Oh my god, not me doing the Ross hands, oh my god. You know, just simplify things. And also, this subplot about her fiance and her being haunted by him completely goes away. Like, I get that once she started to fall for Jamie, that kind of was filling in that missing piece of her soul and was kind of like healing her trauma for her. I get that, but trauma doesn't heal just like that, just like it's done. I was expecting him to come back more. He was like one of the only horror elements in the show. I was like, well, why didn't he come back? Okay, so moving on to episode 4. Well, okay, I kind of just was talking about episode 4, but this is the episode where we get the inkling beginning of the gay struggle, because this is when we figure out when like Dani decides she doesn't want to marry this man, etc, etc. It doesn't seem like it has to do with her sexuality. It's very implicit if it is. I just was more so under the impression that she realized that he just like wasn't the person she wanted to spend forever with. So if that was anything to do with the gay struggle, I don't know. I can't say because it was very implicit. Kind of up to the viewer. So I've already kind of broken that down. I guess let's just move to episode 5. As much as I love Hannah and the fact that she got her own episode, I think that was well deserved. I think this entire episode could have been trimmed down to like a 2-minute scene. I just felt that the endless cycle of like being trapped in purgatory with her, I knew what was happening almost immediately, and I was annoyed that she didn't come to the same conclusion faster. It was so obvious and so predictable. It could have been an epiphany that she had at a very brief moment in another episode. I think the episode could have been deleted. I'm sorry. I know I've been dogging on this show a lot. This show has a lot going for it. It's not a bad show. It's just there is so much that was so disappointing to me. So sorry about it, but I gotta rant every once in a while. Episode 6 can also be deleted. This is the one where we learn about Henry's alter ego and about the deaths of the parents and just their whole like they're not really in the rest of the show. They are unimportant. That whole subplot, it's not needed. It can be deleted. Moving on. Episode 7 pissed me off. Peter ruins everything and he's a villain that has no real origin story. He just kind of seems to be evil with no reason. Possessing Rebecca to then walk into the lake and kill her and then leave her body as soon as she starts dying so she has to feel her death. Bro, men are trash. And then he tries to steal the bodies of the young children to get Rebecca to possess Flora. He goes into Miles. And that was an interesting moment. I was like, okay, this is why we have Peter and Rebecca. This could be a very dramatic moment. And then they got out of it so easily. Rebecca never ended up possessing Flora. She never grappled with her morality and her decisions. It just seemed too easy. That's why this show was so frustrating for me, because I was just like, missed opportunities everywhere. Dani was also literally tied up for that entire scene. She was so passive. I just don't like when characters are that passive. I prefer for them to have some engagement in the scene. Oh man, it's getting dark now. Moving on to arguably the best episode of the entire show, episode 8. Fully filmed in black and white, we got to learn the history of Bly Manor. I thought the story of the lady in the lake was incredible. This is when I was finally starting to really get into the show. I felt that they explained her character and her haunting just enough. Sometimes with supernatural stuff, things are just not explained nearly enough, or they're way over-explained and you're like, okay. This woman of the lake, she drowned, she got stuck there, and over centuries she was just in this repeated cycle of purgatory, and over the centuries she just began to lose herself. She lost her memory, and then metaphorically, like, they showed that with her losing her face as well. Katie Siegel is also just so wildly talented. I loved her, and it was really fascinating after spending so much time in this manor to learn the history of it. I think it was this episode also that had the other jump scare that really got to me. It was the one where her sister opened the chest and then she like jumped out and like strangled her. And then episode 9 it was really enjoyable, and then I just hated the ending. So Flora is saved by Dani welcoming the Lady of the Lake into herself. You'd think that Miss Ghostly would be pleased about being able to sort of hitch a ride and like live life again, especially in the body of this living, breathing lesbian. Like, she was living such a cute life. But no, of course she had to kill her eventually. Of course. So Dani and Jamie's fate was just so tragic and awful, and I'm like, why though? It's just in my personal opinion that when you have put these characters through so many traumatic things in life and like so many traumatic moments throughout their story, it's okay to give them a happily ever after. It's okay to let them be happy. This show was like, no, we're not doing that. My other gripe with the ending is that we did kind of get to see how Flora turned out. We didn't really get to see any of Miles or like what was going on with him. And also we learned that they forgot the events of Bly Manor. That's great. That wraps a really nice little bow on their story, but how? They were definitely old enough to remember all of those events. I was confused. So anyways, that kind of concludes my whole plot wrap up and everything. I want to give my overall thoughts now. I know I just ranted like a lot, but I need to reiterate, this show is not that bad. I did enjoy it. It just was way too slow for me. There was too much going on while not enough was being fleshed out. I felt that a lot of our strongest actors actresses were just very underused. Just a lot of missed opportunities in the show. It also was just very derivative of other things that I've already seen before. It was very derivative of The Haunting of Hill House and of American Horror Story. It just wasn't anything funky fresh enough for me to really be excited about or be that gripped by. So, okay, you know what? Rant over. Please let me know what other shows you'd like me to review. I think eventually I'm definitely going to be rewatching the entirety of American Horror Story because I do that like every 2 years. So I'm due for that coming up. I'm probably gonna start that when I'm done with school, definitely. Right now I'm currently trying to get through The Walking Dead. I'm on season 5 and it's kind of a struggle, but I am gonna finish it. I'm going to. So that's coming up probably in the next couple of months. I probably won't be able to finish that anytime soon. Maybe I'll wait for season 11 to come out and then I'll do like a full review of the entire show. And I'll definitely do American Horror Story for sure, but like just let me know if there's any other shows you'd like me to check out and talk about. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. I also have a vlog channel and I post it over there every now and then, just like my travels and random stuff. That'll be linked down below as well as all my social media, so you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Depop, and Letterboxd at Kai Johns. On Depop I'm selling some movies, so check that out if you're interested. And then on Letterboxd, that's where I talk about movies that I don't intend on reviewing on this channel. My Instagram is where I show you guys what movies I'm watching so you can watch them too, just in case I do a review of them soon. Twitter is mainly for like a lot of my unfiltered opinions, so follow that if you want to have some fun. It's also mainly for activism. So on that note, definitely check out the petitions and the GoFundMe's linked down below. I update those every single week. Oh, also, it's almost Halloween. Halloween is tomorrow. Hell yeah, happy Halloween. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!